Have you ever felt like someone was rewriting your reality in real time? Like you were living in a psychological thriller where the villain wasn't hiding in the shadows, they were sitting right across from you, smiling? Carl Jung once said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what happens when that irritation isn't random, when it's carefully orchestrated? When someone has turned your own psychology into their playground? Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see every relationship in your life. You see, Jung discovered something profound about human nature. We all have a shadow, the parts of ourselves we'd rather not acknowledge. But here's what most people don't realize: emotional manipulators don't just have shadows, they weaponize yours against you. And by the end of this episode, you'll know exactly how they do it, and more importantly, how to stop them. Picture this. You're having a conversation, and suddenly you're apologizing for something you're not even sure you did. You walk away feeling drained, confused, questioning your own memory. Sound familiar? Here's the terrifying truth: this isn't an accident. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Emotional manipulators exploit this terror. They understand that most people would rather doubt themselves than face the uncomfortable truth that someone they trust is playing psychological games with their mind. According to Jung's research on the collective unconscious, we're all wired with certain archetypal patterns: the need for belonging, the fear of abandonment, the desire to be understood. But what if I told you that manipulators study these patterns like a predator studies its prey? They don't need a psychology degree. They intuitively understand what Jung discovered through decades of research, that the human psyche has predictable vulnerabilities. And they exploit every single one. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Jung discovered that we often project our own shadow, our repressed thoughts and feelings, onto others. It's a natural psychological defense mechanism. But manipulators reverse engineer this process. Here's how it works: they project their manipulation onto you, making you believe you're the one being unreasonable, dramatic, or too sensitive. It's psychological judo, using your own mental processes against you. Carl Jung said, projection is one of the commonest psychic phenomena. Everything unconscious in ourselves we discover in our neighbor. But what happens when your neighbor is deliberately planting seeds in your unconscious? The manipulator becomes a mirror that reflects back a distorted version of yourself, one that's always wrong, always overreacting, always the problem. And because this shadow version feels familiar, we all have insecurities, you start to believe it's true. But wait. It gets worse. Jung taught us about the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social situations. It's not fake, it's adaptive. But manipulators don't just wear masks, they force you to wear theirs. They create what Jung would call a false persona, a version of yourself that exists solely to please them, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. And here's the insidious part: this false persona feels like growth. It feels like you're becoming more understanding, more patient, more evolved. But you're not evolving, you're disappearing. According to Jung, individuation, becoming your authentic self, requires integrating all parts of your personality, including the uncomfortable ones. Manipulators prevent this integration by punishing authenticity and rewarding compliance. And here's the part that will shock you. They make you complicit in your own psychological imprisonment. You become the warden of your own emotional jail cell. Jung discovered that societies, groups, and families can have collective shadows, shared unconscious patterns that influence behavior. Manipulators instinctively understand this and use it to their advantage. They don't just manipulate you, they manipulate the entire social ecosystem around you. They become the narrator of your story, telling others, and you, who you are, what you've done, how you should feel. Carl Jung said, the individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. But what happens when the tribe itself has been emotionally hijacked? The manipulator positions themselves as the reasonable one, the victim, the one who's just trying to help. Meanwhile, you're cast as the problem, unstable, dramatic, impossible to please. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Jung discovered that we all carry within us an opposite gender psychological element, the anima, feminine in men, and animus, masculine in women. These represent our capacity for emotion, intuition, and relational connection. Manipulators specifically target these aspects of your psyche. They appeal to your nurturing instincts, your desire to understand and heal others, your capacity for empathy and forgiveness. They make their problems your emotional responsibility. Carl Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." But manipulators ensure you're always looking outside, at their needs, their pain, their version of reality. They keep you so focused on understanding them that you forget to understand yourself. And here's the psychological trap that keeps you stuck. According to Jung, the ultimate goal of human psychological development is individuation, becoming whole, authentic, self-directed. This is exactly what emotional manipulators cannot allow to happen. Why? Because an individuated person is impossible to manipulate. Someone who knows themselves deeply, who trusts their intuition, who has integrated their shadow, this person sees through psychological games immediately. Jung discovered that the path to individuation requires what he called active imagination, the ability to dialogue with your unconscious, to listen to your inner wisdom. But manipulators flood your psyche with so much noise, doubt, and confusion that you can't hear your own voice anymore. They turn your mind into a battlefield where their voice is always loudest. But here's what they don't want you to know. Jung taught us that beneath our personal unconscious lies the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of wisdom shared by all humanity. This is where your most fundamental instincts about truth, danger, and authenticity reside. Manipulators work overtime to disconnect you from this inner compass. They convince you that your gut instincts are wrong, that your emotional reactions are excessive, that your psychological radar is broken. But Jung discovered that this deeper wisdom is almost impossible to fully suppress. Carl Jung said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." But what if those barriers aren't yours? What if they've been installed by someone else? And here's the breakthrough moment that changes everything. Jung discovered that true psychological health requires shadow integration, acknowledging and accepting the parts of ourselves we'd rather deny. But here's the paradox: recognizing manipulation is shadow work. It requires you to face uncomfortable truths, that someone you trusted betrayed that trust, that you allowed yourself to be diminished, that you participated in your own psychological erosion. According to Jung, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness isn't just in the manipulator, it's in your willingness to abandon yourself to avoid conflict. But this realization isn't a failure, it's a doorway to freedom. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." But after manipulation, you might not remember who that is anymore. The good news? Jung discovered that the self, your core essence, is indestructible. It can be buried, distorted, or silenced, but never erased. And it's constantly trying to guide you back to authenticity. Here's how you begin the journey home to yourself. First, practice what Jung called active imagination. Start dialoguing with your inner voice again. Ask yourself, what do I actually think about this? What do I feel when I remove their interpretation? Second, reclaim your shadow. Acknowledge the parts of yourself the manipulator made you suppress. Your anger, your boundaries, your right to disagree. These aren't flaws, they're essential aspects of your wholeness. Third, trust your archetypal wisdom. Jung discovered that we all have access to universal patterns of wisdom. Your instinct to protect yourself, to seek truth, to demand respect, these aren't character defects, they're psychological imperatives. And here's the most powerful tool Jung ever discovered. According to Jung, individuation creates what we might call psychological sovereignty, a state where you become the ultimate authority on your own experience. This is the manipulator's worst nightmare. An individuated person doesn't need external validation to know what's real. They don't require permission to trust their instincts. They don't sacrifice their truth to maintain false peace. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But an individuated person adds, "And everything that tries to manipulate us can lead us to an understanding of our power." Because here's what Jung understood that most people miss. When you heal from manipulation, you don't just heal yourself, you contribute to what Jung called the collective healing. Every person who refuses to be psychologically enslaved makes it harder for manipulation to thrive in our communities, our families, our world. Jung discovered that individual psychological development has collective implications. Your journey back to authenticity gives others permission to do the same. But here's the final piece that ties everything together. Carl Jung said, "The most important question anyone can ask is, what myth am I living?" After manipulation, you get to choose a new myth, one where you're the hero of your own story, not a supporting character in someone else's drama. The journey out of manipulation isn't just about ending toxic relationships. It's about beginning a sacred relationship with yourself. It's about honoring what Jung called the self, that core essence that no amount of manipulation can truly touch. And here's the beautiful truth Jung discovered: once you've made this journey, once you've reclaimed your psychological sovereignty, once you've integrated your shadow and trusted your collective unconscious wisdom, you become virtually immune to future manipulation attempts. Not because you build walls, but because you become so rooted in your authentic self that attempts to distort your reality simply bounce off. You become what Jung would call an individuated soul, someone who knows who they are, trusts what they feel, and refuses to abandon themselves for anyone. Carl Jung's final insight was perhaps his most profound: the return to oneself is the most difficult and important task of all. But it's also the most liberating. Because when you know yourself completely, shadow and light, wounds and wisdom, fears and power, you become unshakable. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because you trust yourself to handle whatever comes. You remember what Jung always knew: you are not who someone else says you are. You are not your trauma, your confusion, or your past compliance. You are a sovereign being with access to universal wisdom, infinite resilience, and the unshakable right to be authentically yourself. And that, my friend, is the truth no manipulator can ever take away from you. Music swells and fades. Because as Carl Jung discovered, the privilege of a lifetime isn't just being who you are, it's remembering that you always had the power to choose who that is. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it.